I have mixed feelings about having to follow Chandu. That was such a brilliant presentation of work. The mixed feelings, the positive being that he manages, I hope, to wake everyone out of their post-lunch slumber. The negative, of course, that he's such a tough act to follow. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much, IBDA, for inviting me to this forum and to present some of our work from the frugal to the ornate stories of the seat in India. Sudhir mentioned a little bit earlier that nobody reads books anymore. I know that my publisher sitting at the back, Vrinda, will be very, very worried when hearing things like that, so I hope it's not true. On social media this last week, there's been a flood of images of Gandhi. Fashion brands, state campaigns, food outlets, and even design studios have appropriated Gandhi's spectacles, his much-used silhouette, and walking stick. Growing up, I was fed many, many stories of Gandhi by my Gandhian professor father. The favorite, of course, was when Gandhi was invited to tea to join King George V in the 1930s at the Buckingham Palace. And a reporter asked him, Mr. Gandhi, do you think you're properly dressed to meet the king? Referring to his simple dhoti. And Gandhi replied, do not worry about my clothes. The king has enough clothes for both of us. The half-naked fakir, as Churchill famously called Gandhi, not only adopted the dress of the common man, but also their floor seat. Even if his seat did not have the same effect as did his choice of clothing, the choice of Gandhi's seat was very, very deliberate. And it was subversive. It was calculated not only to make his European visitors physically uncomfortable, as they sat in their stiff Western clothes on the floor at the same level as others in the room, but also one imagines forcing upon them an uneasy inquiry about inherited notions of Western civility. The half-naked fakir, right? Now, during the colonial era, chairs were emblematic of authority and privilege. The British believed the chair to be a herald of modernity and culture, yes, civility even, in the face of which traditional Indian postures, such as the craftsman that Chandu just showed, were scorned as being barbaric and animistic. There was even a kursi nashin, a piece of paper that was granted the use, that visitors who visited colonial offices were granted so that they were offered a chair. Therefore, the baitak, or the floor seat, Gandhi's working space, his low writing table, and of course his switch to traditional dhoti were all part of a very, very deliberate, politically motivated image-building exercise. The seat and posture became a liberatory symbol, changing the use of the craftsman's posture as a justification for the colonial project from ridicule to respect. And while Gandhi's ideologies inspired the repressed around the world and it led ultimately to the unraveling of the empire, today it is also seen as a decolonial act. Even while the very term decolonial was actually only was possibly coined only in the 1930s, and the usage was spread, later in the 20th century. Now, Sudhir had cautioned me about using the term decolonizing design histories within the title of my talk, quite rightly concerned that the term may be confused with the wave of politics today that has appropriated its use for its own agendas. But I do feel that for far too long, designers have remained wedded to the idea of creating these neutral, universal designs, and also the belief that politics has no place in design. Yet, outside of dirty electoral politics, let's say, the choices we make as designers are intrinsically political. And I mean in the sense that every design choice that we make, there's the potential not just to exclude, but also to oppress. Every design subtly persuades its audience one way or the other. And every design vocabulary has history and context. And while decolonialism, difficult word, difficult idea, challenges the idea that Western European modes of thinking are universal, it is also actually not really about the end of colonialism and more about undoing and debunking existing power and knowledge systems. So, Sudhir, where are you? I don't know. While I've used a relatively tamer title and will be sharing some examples of unpacking or debunking familiar seats, they are merely the foreground of a larger interest that I have, that is in creating alternative perspectives and, yes, a decolonial view of design histories, from the frugal to the ornate, right? Now, this illustration of a pastiche of René Magritte's famous work, drawn by Georgie Paul, my fellow designer who's here. It's not done by an AI bot at all, I assure you. Ceci n'est pas une chaise, or this is not a chair, is a reminder that the very ordinary and familiar seat often serves as a function beyond seating and can be a potent symbol of power dynamics, gender roles, racial, religious, caste, and class hierarchies. For instance, it can play a role in elevating someone to a position of power. It can assist in functional chores. It could play an important role in a ritual. It could dress up a room. In my own house, a not so comfortable chair fills in as a clothes stand. This is not a chair. It could well be an instrument of manipulation, an object designed literally to keep people in their place. Our project traces mudas from ancient India. It traces fusion chairs of the pre-colonial and post-colonial period, grand starburst armchairs from the Art Deco period, and factory-produced iconic Godrej CH4 chairs from the modernist idiom. It also looks at flamboyant postmodernist chairs, and lastly, the fusion of craft and technology in the present neo-modern style. The attempt in terms of the design as well as the content is to seek out really, the smaller, lesser known, marginalized, and yet ubiquitous familiar stories and objects, to challenge Eurocentric ideas of form and aesthetics and rather look for cultural context and significance, to harness community and personal stories and histories to better understand our collective heritage and history. Now, thrones and power are intrinsically and rather obviously linked, you all know. Objects, images, and stories, such as Gandhi's dhoti and seat, have long been used to capture and manipulate in people's imaginations or to perpetuate or challenge power. And so it was in Mughal times as well. Images such as this miniature painting, either commissioned or seeking patronage, eulogized rulers. And in 1635, Shah Jahan descended the dazzling peacock throne in a splendid ceremony in Agra. The throne was part of a deliberate spectacle, a spectacle that directly referenced King Suleiman or King Solomon and all that he embodied, In a sense, its resplendence, its grandeur, and its elevation, lifting as it did the emperor closer to heaven than earth, helped to perpetuate the belief that he ruled by divine right, And it is said that the peacock throne took 7 years to build, at twice the cost of the Taj Mahal. It had a confusion of diamonds, among them the infamous Kohinoor diamond. But more importantly, it was believed that it granted power, grandeur, and spiritual authority to the succession of Mughal rulers that ruled from it. And I'm not going to go into details of how it was destroyed and a version was made and things like that. Parts were scattered. But what we do know is that tales of its power and prestige the throne bestowed continued, amplifying its allure. And replicas were made, representations were made, in the hope that pomp and privilege would once again visit he who sat upon it. Now, by the 18th century or so, the Mughal Empire had shrunk significantly from its glory in the 1600s, where it stretched over a good part of the large subcontinent to very little beyond the capital of Delhi. Now, here's where it actually gets interesting. On the screen is a portrait of Shah Alam II, the descendant of the great Akbar, sometime in the 1800s. And we see him seated on a gilded and bechowered throne, a peacock throne, version 2. The actual truth is far from what you see in this picture, because by the time Shah Alam was, shaky and long reign in the 1800s, a saying was going and doing the rounds in Delhi, which said, Sultanat-e Shah Alam as Dilli ta Palam, or the empire of Shah Alam is from Delhi to Palam, a suburb of Delhi, sort of indicating the really small radius which now the empire occupied. Now, miniature paintings such as these, and what you see on the screen, are as much documentation as their art. And yet, whether these minutely detailed works of arts were actually fueled by actual events, or were they simply demanded as acts of promotion, we may never know. But the fact remains that the fame of an object, the peacock throne in this case, and the renown of people, such as Shah Jahan, are sort of mutually creating, so that objects gain value through links to powerful people, and an individual standing is enhanced through possession of well-known objects. And we see instances of this even today if you only look around. For instance, the recent use of the Ashoka's lion capitals rendered rather shinily and for some reason angrily. What we've also done in the book is to juxtapose the many grand thrones from India alongside another very familiar and popular object, the wedding throne, connecting these to the idea of darshan. The experience of darshan or viewing, whether on to a deity or a royalty or a revered person, it grants the viewer and the viewed direct visual contact with each other. So you have newly married couples in India sit on rather elaborate, garish, shiny, cheaply made replicas of the throne chair during their receptions, and they are also given this sort of due darshan. You see the picture on the top right. Sandeep Sangaru, the furniture designer from Bangalore, his very, very distinct flame-back chair, which you also see on bottom right, it breaks free of formal similarities to a traditional throne chair. And yet, its unique form and rhythmic patterns are very, very commanding. Would being seated on it grant the privilege of darshan? I really wonder. One of the chapters in the book, Poetry and the Common and Everyday, is a celebration of the ordinary. The study of the most banal of objects offers a panoramic understanding of a culture in time. Basic in form and shape, everyday objects that you see on the streets adapt to multiple uses during the course of a day. So they're used as seats in the morning, as platforms to serve food in the afternoon, and to lie down and rest in the evening. And yet, if there's one chair that stands out from all others post-industrialization, it is the egalitarian plastic monoblock chair. And in this illustration that the book, rendered again by Georgie, the plastic chair is placed in a museum glass case, in a sense to subvert and to debunk the everyday existence and in some way pay tribute to it. Why pay tribute to it? Well, found on the street, waiting rooms, in party halls, in museums, no other seat is as commonplace and ubiquitous. Its nondescript character belies its power. Its very, very invisibility enables it to sort of sit in coexistent with an array of other seats and a range of settings. And it's scorned, unfortunately, by formally schooled designers for its fickle nature as it adopts motifs, mimics wood or fiber finishes. And yet we really can't ignore the fact that its role in fulfilling everyday needs is something that we have to recognize. We've seen the many ways in which the seat features in political posturing, the organization of power and privilege through various means follow certain common norms. So there's elevation, so you have a higher chair, you have adornment, you have decoration, you have extravagance, you have use of materials. These are all recurrent elements. However, I believe it is the maverick, it's the non-typical seat that we are compelled to appraise more closely. It's Gandhi's seat on the floor. It's the humble monoblock. It's the legendary peacock throne. Seats that break through their place in time and space, they defy typecasts, and yet they command power. The ones that inspire awe, but also discomfort. And what we must examine for what they tell us is to examine them for what they tell us about ourselves, what are our behaviors and our conventions. Seats that again are conceived and produced by people across faiths and class, invoking the syncretic Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb, which I'm sure Chandu would know of in a lot of craft traditions, of keeping communities intrinsically connected. Yeah? It is surely to these that we must look to for inspiration. alternative and decolonial design histories are an attempt to look at stories and objects that evoke feelings and relationships in order to achieve solidarity, resolutions to change the world in the future, and most importantly, the restoration of human dignity. The design of this project is not just about the aesthetics of font and color, but it is in the selection and the choice of the seats that are featured. It is in the writing style, it is in the language, it is in the structuring and the content and the planning of the cross connections that exist. It is in its insistence to reach out not just to designers, but to the person on the street, as readers. It is in using a very, very familiar object, the seat, and unpacking it, in debunking it, and thus encouraging an alternate view of our collective cultural and design histories. The entire project weaves intertextually. It moves from the past to the present and from the present to the past. And yet I will ask, while I recognize it's important to bring people to the table, is it not equally important to ask what sort of seat are you offering? This here very, very brilliant painting of Begum Samru, a 19th century part nautch girl, but actually a power broker who had an entire mercenary army, seated in various degrees of distance and elevation. I find this a sort of a remarkable instance of the relationship and the power and posture that exist today. I'd like to end this presentation with a little clip. Can we have the video? We have a website called 100seatsofindia.com. And I'm here with my fellow designer, Georgie Paul, and Brinda Patare, who's a little bit more than just a publisher. Their team in Godrej have been supportive in the production. So do speak to them if you'd like to know more or to get their point of view on this project. This is just a sort of a film off the website, but you can go to it. It's called 100seatsofindia.com. It's for people who may not want to read the book, like what Sudhir is saying. It looks at a more object-oriented approach, while the book is a bit heavy and things like that. Thank you very much.